All right, well, welcome, my friends, audiences everywhere, to the Sylvatic Cycle Report. I have here Dr. Luis Escobar from Virginia Tech University. Dr. Escobar, would you like to introduce yourself and explain a little bit about what you do?
Hi. Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I'm Luis Escobar. I am an associate professor in disease ecology and disease biogeography at Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia. And we study different disease systems, including viruses or fungi in fish, ectoparasites, endoparasites in mammals, and also viruses in birds. We try to identify some biogeographic rules that govern these signals of why we have disease emerging in some places or species, but not in others.
What exactly is disease ecology for people who might not know?
Traditional ecology, a traditional definition will be the study of the abundance and distribution of species. It's just that we focus on those species or organisms that cause disease.
So it's like the ecology of how viruses and parasites and bacteria fit into the broader ecosystem.
Yeah. As we try to see if they play a role, and if we can see that, we try to make some inferences of what will happen if I change the number of hosts or rodents, for example, or if I change the ecosystem. What happens when we disturb the ecosystem? What's going to be the cascade effect?
I just think that's so cool to think about. Like, the first time somebody ever explained what disease ecology was, I'm like, wait a minute, germs are just like any other organism that fit into the ecosystem. And I thought that kind of blew my mind, you know? Uh,
Yeah, you're right.
um,
They are just trying to survive and perpetuate.
yeah,
Sorry.
they're trying to make a living on this rock just as much as we are. So the other thing that you said that you study is biogeography. When I explain biogeography to people, I always use the example of asking people why don't polar bears eat penguins, and everybody always says, well, obviously because polar bears live in the north, penguins live in the south. But then, you have to answer the additional question, well, why don't polar bears live in the south? But how would you explain biogeography?
Yeah, biogeography is a branch of evolutionary biology, as you were explaining with bears and penguins, that has a specific geographic context. So, trying to understand why, under conditions that may be environmentally similar, like the poles,
Mm-hmm.
why we have these different assemblages of species, and maybe that's because we need to think in geography that which make us uh, have this constraint of dispersal of species.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they could disperse better. They could colonize both, but if we take into account geography, then we have these barriers. We need to
Yeah.
think in barriers to see, that's why this species evolved here and these others evolved
Mm-hmm.
here. The same happens in the tropics, why we don't have um, hippopotamus in Colombia. We
Oh,
actually have,
oh,
but they're invasive, right?
yeah.
That's what we try to understand in biogeography.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. There's so many cool things that you can look at biogeography. I remember learning about things like island dwarfism and like how strange things happen, how strange the distribution of animals is on islands and things like that. And it's a very fascinating subject. I took a class in it in my undergrad, and definitely interesting. So that's pretty cool. So tell us a little bit about how you got interested in this line of work. Like, why did you decide to become a scientist, and why did you become interested in the ecology and geography of diseases?
I remember that since I am 9 years old, I knew I wanted to work with animals and to be veterinarian. So I became a veterinarian, and then the challenge was, okay, what's next?
Mm-hmm.
I could work with livestock or like family animals or maybe wildlife or public health.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided to try to do a combination of them. First, I worked in a dairy farm for 2 years. Then I found that my heart was more in research.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw that working on public health and wildlife actually was not crazy. It was not a crazy idea. And I began working at a university in Guatemala. I'm originally from Guatemala. And there was an outbreak of pamper bat rabies
Mm-hmm.
there. And that what happened is that they said that there were they were cutting the forest in Mexico, in the Guatemala-Mexico border, and then they saw more bats in Guatemala, and then they saw cases of rabies in Guatemala. So I was thinking, you change the ecosystem, and you see that species disperse, and then you see cases of disease, emergent diseases. So that was a speculation because that was not proven at that time, but now we see many examples of something that happening. So I found my way through wildlife diseases. So I got a master's in wildlife management, and then I did a PhD in disease ecology using rabies in bats as my thesis. And since then, I have been working on wildlife diseases, and including as wildlife, fish, birds, and mammals.
That's pretty interesting that you used to be a veterinarian because like going through graduate school myself, it's so interesting meeting all of my classmates who like lived completely different lives before they went to grad school. I knew one girl who used to be a dentist. I another person who studied like traditional Chinese medicine, and I think that's cool that you used to be a vet and that you came into research wildlife disease research through that route, because we're one thing that's really been emphasized lately in the world of public health is the One Health movement, where we focus on not just human health but animal and wildlife and environmental health as well. And I think that's a pretty interesting story.
Yeah, it's a concept that has been gaining a lot of attention. I guess that veterinarians were very aware of that because they work with animals that are very dependent of the grass, for example, all the surrounding environment. But physicians were a bit or are still a bit more resistant to thinking in the One Health framework. And also biologists are also a bit resistant to jump into working with infectious diseases. So I guess that is a nice uh, concept to try to put all together with the same terminology.
Yeah, hopefully there's gonna be more collaboration across fields as time goes on, because none of us live in a vacuum, and the story of our health doesn't begin and end at a human's doctor's office.
Mhm.
So you said you did your thesis on vampire bats, and I actually found you that way because I was looking for researchers who were studying rabies as part of a series that I want to do on rabies for my channel. Um, can you tell me a little bit about your vampire bat research?
Yeah, my thesis focused on rabies circulating in bats that eat insects, so insectivorous bats.
Mm.
It's very interesting because they have their own lineage of the virus, and you can identify the source of the virus based only on the genetics of the virus,
Oh.
because there is some fidelity. So
Mm.
the viruses, rabies viruses infecting insectivorous bats tend to be different to the rabies viruses infecting bumper bats or
Oh.
frugivorous bats. Um, so also we could identify the geographic source of infections. Something we found is that even when we have two different bat species with two different rabies strains, these infections tend to happen under consistent ecological conditions. So they don't happen randomly, or they don't happen in some conditions, and the other lineage happens in another set of conditions. They tend to be ecologically similar, which, thinking with the ideas of evolutionary biology, it's interesting because that means that even when they infect differently or they cause disease differently, they still retain their ancestral requirements for the environment or for the
Oh.
host.
So what I'm understanding is, a species will pick up a rabies virus, and then that virus will circulate among that species as, the individuals bite each other or infect each other. And when that virus circulates, in that species for long enough, it becomes genetically distinct just by building up mutations. And one thing I learned in my own biogeography courses is that you can actually tell how a creature or an organism moves around the environment by looking at its genetic diversity in different regions. So, did you mention something that you could tell how the virus was spreading based on genetic analysis? Did I hear you mention something like that?
Yeah, we are doing that kind of research for hantaviruses. And
Oh.
hantaviruses are interesting because they have a global distribution. You find them in Asia, in Europe, in Africa, in the Americas, but that doesn't happen with rabies. Rabies
Hmm.
in bats can be found only in the Americas, for example.
Oh.
But for hantaviruses, what we found is that in Europe or Asia, if you find one strain of the virus, it's very likely that comes from a specific rodent host.
Hmm.
So they are very loyal, or they are very specialized to
Hmm.
that host species. But if you go to the Americas and you try to find hantaviruses, one strain could be found in many species of rodents.
Oh.
So then they tend to be more generalists.
More generalist. So like the Eurasian hantavirus strains, like one strain will only infect, this one species of marmots or this one species of hamster. Whereas if you go to Americas, the hantavirus strains tend to be a little bit more spread out. It might infect a squirrel and a chipmunk and a prairie dog or something like that. Is that what I'm hearing?
Something like that,
Yeah.
yes. And we believe, at least I think, that this special feature of
Mm-hmm.
the hantaviruses in the Americas is what makes them more dangerous for human
Yeah.
health,
Yeah.
because that means they can have this capacity to infect people and remain in people.
Yeah, because when this stuff came out about the hantavirus outbreak from the cruise ship, I did some research and I learned that the hantaviruses that circulate in North and South America have a lot of rather serious differences than the ones in Eurasia, whereas and I learned that the ones in the Americas infect people a lot less often, but they cause much more serious disease. And do you
Mhm.
think maybe that has something to do with the fact that these viruses have the ability to infect multiple hosts?
Maybe, but also I think that we have more infections than the actual numbers we see,
Mm,
because there are some infected people that maybe may not develop the disease at all.
yeah,
They are going to
that's
develop antibodies and be reactive, but they will not recall to being infected or with
oh,
fever
that's
or in bed.
interesting. So That's actually pretty interesting. You know, because a lot of people knew that for COVID, you could get the virus and not even know it. So it could be that this virus is circulating a lot more widely than we know it is. Is that what I'm hearing?
Hmm.
Oh, that's interesting. Um, so to go back to the vampire bats and to the insectivorous bats. So you said that you were investigating. So the story that I heard you just say was that there had been a lot of deforestation in Mexico, and the bats had gone south into Guatemala. Is that what happened?
That's what I was told at the time, and
Mm.
that's why we were doing this outbreak investigation, and we went to capture bumper bats and try to find rabies in the samples we collected, and we were doing interviews to people to try to learn how exposed they were
Mm.
to bites from bumper bats. Yeah, but that again, there was no formal study
Mm.
on that. That speculation was the driver of our
Mm-hmm.
research, but our research was more focused on recovering the virus from wildlife.
What did you guys discover?
At that time, that was research where I was serving as mainly as a secondary investigator, more like a technician. And my colleagues phoned because we were doing interviews to people, asking them, "Do you remember having any bites?" And I remember that from these surveys, we found that uh, people were having bites
Mm-hmm.
from bumper bats, and how they found that is that the pillow was completely wet of blood, and they
Oh
have a
man,
tiny bite here in the tip of the
the lobe.
ear, or maybe in the tip of the head, top of the head, the tip of the fingers, and also kids were more attacked than adults,
Oh,
and among kids, boys were more attacked.
that's interesting.
Why? We don't know. Maybe they sleep deeper. We don't know. And bumper bats, what they do is that they come and they tease you. They try to touch you, and if you don't react, that means
Mm.
they can bite you. But if you are more reactive, they
Oh,
prefer to
so they're
avoid
pretty
that.
smart about it.
Yeah, they have very fragile teeth, and
Mm.
if they break their teeth because for example,
Yeah,
a horse kicks or something, they're going to have a big trouble feeding themselves later.
yeah. So they're pretty careful. It seems.
Hmm.
Um, that's interesting. That because I had heard people say that mosquitoes, have preferences for different types of people, and it's always like a legend that people say, like, oh yeah, like if you wear, I would never have guessed that vampire bats would have had preferences.
Hmm. They have preference for a specific species,
Mm-hmm.
and once they find the individual in a herd
Mm-hmm.
that is their prey, they are going to visit that individual for several nights.
Oh, so if a cow gets bit like one night, there's a chance it could get bit another night.
Correct.
So those bats, they're learning.
Yes.
Oh, that's pretty interesting. So another word that so when I was doing research on the things that you are researching, a word kept coming up which was spillover, and you and I know what spillover means in terms of disease ecology, but do you think you could explain why spillover is an important concept for the audience?
Uh, there are different ways to use the concept, but I think in general we use it in the context of one parasite
Mm-hmm.
infecting naturally one species
Mm-hmm.
of host. It could be one species of plant or one species of bird or one species of fish, and having the capacity to infect maybe accidentally another different species. Could be from the same evolutionary close or evolutionary distant. So this cross-species transmission is what we refer to as spillover. Yeah.
So that kind of like sort of that concept of the cross species transmission kind of is an extremely important concept for One Health in general and disease ecology in general, because, for example, if you have vampire bats who are sharing rabies back and forth among each other, and then one bites a human and the human gets rabies, that's a spillover. And that's why we have to worry about vampire bats in the first place. So, it's kind of a central concept for disease ecology and One Health approach to public health, it would seem.
Correct. There are some instances where, for example, we as humans are infected accidentally by viruses that naturally circulate in wildlife species. And we can become end hosts, like in the case of rabies. Generally, we become infected, we develop the symptoms, and we die. And before we die, we are unable to transmit the virus to other species or to other humans.
Yeah.
So what we're more concerned about is this host shift, where after the spillover happens, the new host can transmit the disease to others.
So, like, for example, there aren't very many people, like you just said, there aren't very many examples of a person with rabies biting another person and giving them rabies. But,
exactly.
And for hantavirus, there usually isn't. Most people who get hantavirus don't share it, but now we have this Andes virus strain that's been in the news that that is human to human transmissible. Do you have any opinions about this recent outbreak that happened on that cruise ship?
Yeah, I think that what the viruses will try to do is to avoid killing the humans very fast. So having a long incubation period and having mild symptoms is what makes pathogen very successful for human-to-human transmission. In the case of hantavirus, it has very high mortality. So every time that we detect a case, everybody's concerned, and we try to stop the outbreak as fast as we can. So the containment has allowed us to stop outbreaks very early. But I think that if the virus has the capacity to be less lethal, it will facilitate its spread because it's going to be under-detected or it's not going to be detected easily.
So that's an interesting thing that you bring up, that less lethal viruses spread more easily. For example, something like herpes simplex virus, which infects 90% of people on Earth. I get cold sores, so I have this virus living in my lip. It just lives there, and it doesn't cause me any problems except for a occasional little uncomfortable cold sore. And this virus is able to colonize 90% of the people on the planet, whereas something like Ebola virus, where half of the people get it, will die. An outbreak might, we have this current outbreak that's killed 65 people, which is obviously unacceptable, and we need to get it under control, but it's not likely to spread very far and wide. And so what I'm hearing you say is that if hantavirus were to become successful at spreading human to human, it would need to adapt to be less lethal. Is that what I'm hearing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting thing, like when I first learned about how diseases like adapt to their host like that kind of blew my mind. Like I would think that like, oh, the stronger disease would be the one that's more deadly, but that's not necessarily the case. Evolution often favors the less deadly one.
Yeah, a pathogen that kills the host very fast is going to have less time
Yeah.
to spread from that host.
So you've done research on bats. I'm just wondering your opinion. Why do you think bats are such important animals for disease ecology? Like, why is it, do you think, that so many viruses like Nipah and Ebola and rabies are rooted in bats? Do you think it's because bats are very social? Do you think it's because they're so ecologically diverse? Like, why bats, do you think?
I don't think only bats. I think that that's a misconception and a bias against bats because we still have very nasty diseases, hemorrhagic fevers, and from rodents.
Yeah.
So I think bats are not particularly special in that sense related to emergent diseases. One one year we have COVID-19, another year we have hantaviruses, one from bats, one from rodents. Yeah. But definitely bats are very different to rodents in the sense that they colonize different ecosystems. Rodents
Yeah.
tend to be very similar ecologically, but bats, you have some that eat blood, some that eat nectar, some that eat insects, so very different. And also, uh, bats can survive 40 years.
Oh
So their,
yeah.
their, their physiology is very different. A rodent, couple of years.
Yeah.
So I guess that there are many instances why we see bats as different in terms of ecology, physiology, evolution.
Yeah.
But as a source of pathogens, I'm the same level of scare from pathogens that come from bats than those that come from rodents.
See, I'm a huge bat fan. I don't like people disrespecting bats, so uh, you know, I uh, I'm glad to see somebody's defending the good name of bats.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess obviously the audience should know. Please don't touch wild animals. Don't touch wild
Mm-hmm.
animals.
Yeah, that also goes to birds.
Yeah.
So a duck could be still very threatening if they have some kind of high pathogenic avian influenza. And avian influenza has been causing different outbreaks, disrupting the international poultry industry, infecting people. So still, birds have deserve uh, their concern in terms of emergent diseases.
Yeah. If I understand correctly, influenza viruses came from waterfowl originally. Is that something that you had heard, or that's something I had learned
Mm,
in one of my classes, but I'm not sure if it's true or not. I'll have to double check.
I think that if you capture different species of birds, if you capture some seawater species, it's more likely that they are going to have the virus. Maybe because they become social, maybe because they share the environment, and they can get infections from infected water. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, and H5N1, the bird flu, that's really scary right now because it's one that spreads very easily, not from person to person, but it's also very dangerous to humans. So a lot of researchers, are you working on any research projects involving bird flu at all?
We have an ongoing project. The paper has been completed, and we were investigating the different strains of influenza across different species of birds. and trying to account for what are the drivers of infection. Is something in the landscape, something in the climate, something about the host, their size, their sex. We were trying to identify many traits across scales to find what will explain better finding the virus. And we were able to find some hotspots in the US where recovering the virus is more likely, and also species from which, if we want to find the virus, we should target those species. Yeah.
Like species of birds that are most likely to be carrying H5N1?
We focused on all these species.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there are not many reports of the highly pathogenic
Mm,
strain, so we want to be inclusive
yeah.
and consider other strains that may not be zoonotic, for example, but
Mm-hmm.
still can teach us about coevolution or ecology.
Yeah. Because, like, just because a virus isn't super deadly, that doesn't mean it's not important because, even quote unquote minor infections can still have serious ramifications for humans. And as you said, we still learn a lot by studying the less lethal strains, even if they're not as attention grabbing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I saw, it seems to me that you've worked on just about every single zoonotic germ under the sun. I've seen you've talked a little bit about hantaviruses, you've talked about rabies, we're talking about bird flu. I've also seen that you researched chronic wasting disease. Can you tell the audience a little bit about that?
Yeah, good question. So what we try to do is try to see if there are some rules that explain why we have wildlife diseases in some places or species or seasons. Um, and by doing that, we try to test different disease systems,
Mm,
viruses, bacteria, fleas. I really enjoy working with fleas or ticks. And then at some point during our investigations, we landed on the challenge of prions,
mm-hmm.
which are infectious proteins that then could become infectious and transmit among different individuals.
Mm,
They are not living organisms. They don't have genetic material, but they are infectious. They are like one individual can amplify the amount of prions and shed it, and another can recover it and also increase the amount
yeah.
and develops disease symptoms. So it's between infectious and pollution. I don't know.
Mm,
It's very interesting. So we try to see if prions or chronic wasting disease is the disease affecting cervix in the US,
mm-hmm. Deer.
and we try
Deer and like elk
here.
and things like that.
Mhm.
Um,
and and we try to see if that they happen randomly or if the landscape can point us in the right direction to see where we should be doing surveillance or
mm,
where we should expect the next outbreak.
oh yeah. And these prions, they're super scary because like since they're not alive, you can't kill them. You can't. They're not. It's not the sort of thing where you can. They can quote unquote survive. They can last in the environment a long time, and a deer comes and eats grass that's contaminated with prions, and then they get sick. It's pretty scary. And so this prion that causes chronic wasting disease, if I'm correct, it's the same type of protein that causes like quote unquote mad cow disease and Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease in humans. Is that correct?
It's not the same because uh, scientists differentiate them in terms of their morphology,
Mm,
and they are different. So they also found that because we don't see cases of humans, although we have a nationwide distribution of chronic wasting disease, it seems that uh, it's not a very high public health concern. It seems to be very restricted by a species barrier,
That's
so
interesting.
that the tissue of deer are more suitable for the amplification of infectious prions, but the tissue of the brain of other species may not be very suitable for that.
So like so do we have any examples of like prion diseases spreading between livestock and deer? Or is it or are the prion diseases just completely different?
Uh, I don't know of any evidences of that. There have been some experimental inoculations, and the prions still fail to infect
That's
other
interesting.
species. So that gives us some peace of mind.
Yeah, so and I know that they tell hunters, people who eat venison to be very careful not to, to break into the nerve tissue where the prions live. But unfortunately, it's not the sort of thing that's going to be destroyed by cooking. So, but it's good to
That is
know.
correct.
It's good
Hot
to.
water doesn't degrade infectious prions, but a bleach seems to work
Oh, that's
some
good to know.
concentrations, so that can help to infect the equipment
Yeah.
and surfaces.
Yeah, that's good to know that, humans aren't at risk. So, if humans aren't at risk from CWD, from chronic wasting disease, in your opinion, why do you think that chronic wasting disease is worth studying? Do you why what is it that's interesting to learn about it that could be useful for people or could be useful for science in general?
I think that um, it's good that it's not zoonotic as far as we know. Uh,
Zoonotic is it can't spread between animals and people very well.
yeah, sorry, the pathogens that originate in animals and infect people. Um, so the something that this disease has is that it's very close to human dementia. So by having many individuals infected in the wild, we can study the progression of the disease, potential treatment, ways to block transmission, or things like that for these or other prion diseases affecting only livestock like scrappy or affecting only humans. The problem, though, is that at least we have failed to succeed in securing funding to use chronic wasting disease as a model of an infectious prion. And the reviewers from the NIH, what they claim is we don't see the need because this is not a zoonotic disease.
Yeah.
So
As if
we
deer
have
aren't important in and of themselves.
we made the case saying that if we have more deer, we have more crop damage, we have more car accidents. Uh, we have a series of uh, issues, economic issues beyond only um, zoonotic transmission, because we know that when there is chronic wasting disease in some places, hunters tend to stop hunting there. So that's going to generate more deer in some areas that have the disease. But still, we have we we seem to have other priorities in terms of the allocation of funding, which I understand, but I still don't
Yeah,
share.
it could be a headache in science, where it lives and dies by the funding, and it'd be nice if we had the funds to study everything that's useful and interesting. But it
Yeah,
could be
it's part of the game. We need
yeah.
to be resilient. We need to be a bit. Mm, it's part of the science communication game too,
Yeah.
because if we fail in sharing how important our work is,
Yeah.
nobody's going to support it.
Yeah. I mean, I can think of a million reasons why, chronic wasting disease is important to study, but, and I'm sure you can too. And, if we have a call to action for the audience, it would be us, vote for more science funding, support science funding. Is there anything interesting you've discovered so far about chronic wasting disease?
We found that the environment can explain where we have infection. We assume that that's because the landscape explains where we have higher densities of deer, which facilitates transmission versus areas where deer are more scattered, less contact and less chances for transmission maybe. But just based on the landscape, we were able to reconstruct the waves of transmission, and then we were able to predict some paths of spread for the future, which so far we have not evaluated our models. But every time that we see new reports of chronic wasting disease in Virginia, where we did the study, it fits with our predictions.
Oh, that's pretty cool. And just like doing those biogeographic models of where are we going to find this disease in the landscape. That's pretty cool. So what sort of interesting projects are you working now? Do you have like a project right now that you're like particularly excited about?
We are trying to see how climate change will impact in emerging diseases, and for that there are some approaches that we can use. One is to wait for climate change to happen in the next 50 or 100 years. We don't have the time. So what we are doing is measuring climatic variation by going to the Andes Mountains and going from the coastal areas to the mid elevations to the higher elevations. And across this gradient of elevation, we can measure changes in temperature from warm to cold. So we are tracking one rodent species across these elevations, and we are measuring hantavirus across elevations and environments as a means to see how we can calibrate our models and ask, what if I increase 1 degree of temperature? What's going to happen with the prevalence? That's one of my major projects in the lab, and the other project is to study the continental structure of rabies transmission in bats. We found that rabies in bats seems to originate from insectivorous bats, and that rabies in insectivorous bats in the Americas seems to come from insectivorous bats from Asia. Even if we don't find rabies in Asia yet, everything is pointing in that direction. So everything is still work in progress, thesis students, but in general, we try to elucidate the mechanisms for cross-species transmission to happen, because we believe that if we understand how this transmission happens, that's going to explain diversification of viruses in general.
So to make sure I understand, so what you're doing with this hantavirus project in the Andes is, so like what species of rodent particularly are you guys looking at right now? Is it one species or a different species?
Different species, depending on the area of the world. For example, we have a project here in the U.S. where we are measuring hantavirus from Florida to Alaska. And we are focused on Peromyscus maniculatus, which is very abundant and very common. And that's why it's easy to study, measure populations, and see how this species has antibodies against hantavirus. And in South America, what we are doing across elevations, but this time not going from south to north, as in the US, but from low to highland, we are measuring hantavirus in the species Oligorhizomes longicaudatus, that is also a very common rodent and highly associated with rural houses and cases of hantavirus in people.
So to make sure I understand, because I did one of these, like, what are the ecological niche modeling projects in my school, but to make sure that the audience can understand it. So basically what you're doing is you're looking at like the temperature of where the rodent lives and the temperatures of where the virus lives, and since you know the temperatures of where it lives, that means that you can predict where it will be in the future as the temperature changes.
That is correct. So it's very related to physiology. So we have a minimum and a maximum, and everything in the middle are the conditions that are suitable for our species. So we want to identify what's that range, because outside that range, we assume the species cannot survive. So we develop these models, and we try to understand the tolerances of the species, but also we can project that model into a map to see where these suitable environments fall.
It's pretty cool. That's what biogeography is. You can use it to predict the future, which is very useful when it comes to talking about germs.
Yes.
So I guess the question, a lot of people might be wondering is how can members of the public protect themselves from these spillover incidents? If they're afraid of, a germ that's out in the wild, like how can people protect themselves?
That's a great question, and I think my recommendation will be to maintain the hygiene etiquette. Like if you are in a plane, wear a mask, N95. That's going to protect you against any respiratory virus. Wash your hands when you are in your office or in your house, in your job, or in your house. That's going to protect you also from any digestive pathogens. And get your vaccines.
Yeah.
Be sure that you take your vaccines every year. And if you cough, always be respectful of others, right? Those are the fundamentals. And I have seen, maybe this is a hunch, but I have seen that we are losing that. As we are far from the COVID pandemic, we are losing that etiquette.
I guess, we can worry all day long about, the diseases that the bats or the deer or the rodents are carrying, but it's the diseases that we carry that are the ones that are the most dangerous to us. So, if you go back to basics, wash your hands, cover your mouth, wear a mask, that's going to solve a lot of problems.
Exactly. For many pathogens, even the ones that are endemic, like the seasonal flu.
Yeah. Flu kills, I think it's like 50,000 Americans a year. I need to double check that matter. It's in the tens of thousands. So, and I actually ended up in the emergency room last year because of I had forgotten to get my flu shot. So, yeah, it's like we were saying, those minor viruses can end up being a big problem.
Yeah, sorry to hear that.
Oh, it's okay. I'm fine now. But just warning the audience. But thank you. So in your opinion, what are some government policies, either local at a state or a national level, that we could do to help protect the public from zoonotic spillover?
I think I have some recommendations here and some concerns. Something we saw with the hantavirus outbreak recently is that there was a fast response. There was collaboration from passengers, collaboration from the company behind the cruise. There was coordination of countries in terms of tracing the exposed people and also helping with the diagnostics. We had the involvement of the World Health Organization, helping to coordinate and inform, give some experience. But the U.S. is withdrawing participation from the World Health Organization. So I think I will I will be concerned of that. I
Mm,
also will be concerned about seeing um, um little efforts in
mm,
terms of be prepared for the next pandemic. The
yeah.
National Institute, no, the National Academy of Medicine released a report in December 2025, so very recently, showing that the world is still underprepared
Yeah.
for another pandemic, and that we should focus on understanding better the influenza viruses
Hmm.
and the coronaviruses. We
Yeah.
still know very little about them, and that countries should invest at least 1% of the uh, funding in the Department of Defense to support pandemic prevention and preparedness.
Yeah.
And what we're doing instead is reducing the funding for
Mm,
that. I will advocate for having more authority, freedom, and resources for these agencies, including the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
hmm.
I work with rabies. The U.S. is under high exposure for wildlife rabies,
Mm,
and they are just cutting the funding for rabies epidemiology. So
oh man.
I anticipate that under that scenario, we are going to see more human deaths due to wildlife rabies in the US.
Oh man. And I can, part of the goal of my channel is to advocate for health social justice. I feel like there's kind of an attitude among a lot of people in our government that there's a lot of people whose lives just don't matter. And so they're cutting this funding because they think that those deaths and those illnesses are acceptable, and it's very sad for me. I hope those trends can reverse. I hope we can resume more. I think the things that you advocated right there are very common sense. Definitely.
Yeah, we are. I'm just a scientist. I don't have any uh, training in policy or international affairs, but I have been in meetings
Mm,
where they say how many deaths do we have for this disease, this number, and they say no, it doesn't worth the investment. Let's focus on
man.
this other disease, right?
Mm,
So these kind of decisions are happening in a dimension that I, as a basic scientist, cannot understand well.
yeah.
So my work, I guess, will be limited to try to give them the best
Yeah.
information we have.
And it's difficult because because we as scientists we can't science our way out of these problems. They're political problems, and we can't. It's not something that we're going to solve by crunching the numbers harder or getting more data. It's going to involve changing the way people in our government think, and that's a harder task than figuring. It's easier to figure out that rabies virus in bats comes from Asia than it is to get politicians to care about protecting people from that virus. I feel like.
Yeah, but I think is what you are doing is key because you are informing
Oh well,
the
thank
public,
you.
and the public has the power to guide uh, policy directions through their
Mm-hmm.
vote.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Oh well, thank you. I'm hopefully it ends up reaching a lot of people. What can my audience do to support your work?
I think we will appreciate if you read about our work,
Mm-hmm.
the work that my students are doing, and if you trust uh, sources that come from scientists
Mm-hmm.
actively doing research,
Mm-hmm.
because you are going to see some other blogs where they give their discussions based on hunches, or they are
Yeah.
not actually doing the science. So I
Mm-hmm.
will be more cautious in filtering the sources of information so we can be well informed.
Yeah. And that's hard to do because, when you have a lot of information coming at you, you don't always know who to trust. But
Mhm.
if you can find like scientists who are actually working on the topic at hand, that's definitely helpful.
Exactly, exactly. Yes, some expertise
Yeah.
or experience on that.
Mhm. So you're from, was it Guatemala?
Hmm.
If I ever visit Guatemala, what should I go see?
I think very underrated are the museums. We have a natural history museum that is very small and very representative of the investments in life sciences in the country. But you are going to see one of the unique specimens of the Podilimbus gigas, that is a bird that got extinct very recently. Also, in that same area, we have museums of archaeology, anthropology, so you can understand some of the ancestral or history of the country. Then most gosh will be Antigua,
Mm.
that is 45 minutes from the airport, and is frozen on time, uh, in time, related to the colonial era. And it's a nice mix also with the indigenous Mayan culture of
Oh,
Guatemala. That will be my suggestions for a fast trip to Guatemala. Yeah.
well, definitely. You're definitely convinced me it's on my travel bucket list now. I really do appreciate you taking the time to meet with me. I'm sure my audience is going to appreciate it as well.
Okay. Thank you so much for the interview,
Yeah,
for
well,
your
thank you so
support.
much for taking the time. Yeah, you have a
Okay.
wonderful day.
You too.
Yeah,
Have a good one. Bye bye.
see ya.